All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in our new webinar session, Creating Socially Impactful Communication for CALD Audiences, as part of Polaron Connect webinar series. Please feel free to ask any questions, and we'll try our best to address them at the end of the session. Now I will hand it over to Eva, who will give us an introduction about today's topic.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and welcome everyone. We've got heaps of people registered for this webinar today. And you know, normally we try and we do like a massive brainstorm with Andrea and Nicholas and other people from the Language Services Department about what might be of interest to people. And you know, sometimes it's a hit and miss, but this one's definitely a hit. So we had, I think, something like 80 people register for the webinar. So welcome everyone. And as Andrea said, there'll be plenty of opportunities to ask questions. And I'll now move on very quickly to tell you, in case you don't know who we are. We are a Melbourne-based translation and interpreting company. That's me. I still practice as an interpreter and translator a little bit. And that's my favorite job in the world. But, you know, given that the company's grown, this is our 20th year, by the way. In November, there's going to be a big party, hopefully, in Melbourne. And then, you know, I still like to keep my hand in interpreting and translating in Polish. This is Polish English is my language pair. I don't do it so much anymore. We cover, I think, something like 176 languages. So if I could ask you, Andrea, to move on. That is on that screen. You've got Nicholas, who everybody knows Nicholas, of course. He's the friendliest client relationship manager in the world, but really his job is to help you communicate. So he's the kind of meat in the sandwich, I guess is the best way to describe it, between clients, our project managers, and everyone that works on various projects that he handles. But it is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you today Pan Sandamin. You can see her on your screen. Hello, Pan. She's someone quite amazing, and I haven't had the pleasure of working with her before. But today, before the session, we sort of caught up for about half an hour, and I am just amazed at how much she's achieved in the last 11 years, which is how long she's been in Australia. She's a national finalist of the Miss World Australia initiative, but her main job really is to advocate for human rights. So she's told me that she is quite active in the immigration space and also international student space. So she'll tell us a bit more, but essentially for purpose of today, she's a representative of the Rohingya community in Australia. And Pan's also a director of Empower Success Media. And that's something quite new and exciting for her. But we'll let her speak about that in a moment. So we just move on, Andrea, thank you. What do we do? Look, we do everything from translation to interpreting to developing services and products for culturally and linguistically diverse communities in Australia. We do work into about 176 languages, I think. And we've got around 1,500 NATI certified translators and interpreters that we work with. And we've been around since 2000. We do have international offices, but Melbourne is our head office. Okay, this is just a list of services we provide. So we can skip that, but those of you that our clients and working with us, you'll know that we are very big on developing communication strategies and collateral for communities with communities, and that's our core business. That's what we do, you know, most of. All right. It is true that we care about the quality of the work that we do, and we only as good as our last translation. And that's something I often say, because at the end of the day, you know, all the effort that people put into communication with diverse audiences has to pay off. And I guess today's webinar is about that. Why should you spend all this money and all this effort? What difference does it make to the communities that we work with? What are the outcomes? What are the benefits? You know, how can we measure what we do is the big question that we're going to be discussing today. And we truly, every single one of us that works at Polaron, we care about that. And every single translator, every single community leader we work with, really at the end of the day, we think of the person that reads your brochures, the person that watches your videos, the person that needs this information to be part of the Australian community. Okay, so I hope you've had your coffee, and if you have had your coffee, this might be too much, this next slide, but I thought I'll make it really impactful and powerful. And I'll explain to you why I have put there what I have put there. So you can see that it's a pyramid. On that image, I have put a translator as the person that you might typically be working with. And a translator is a single person that probably works from home, somewhere in the suburbs, and you know, they obviously do their best with the translation project, but it's a one-to-one relationship. So if we ask a translator to translate a brochure and you then put it on your website, that's most likely where it's going to stay. However, if you involve other people in the design of your collateral, for example, interpreters, or one interpreter even, they are not only going to contribute to the quality of your translation, but they will tell the world about the project that they've worked on, about the information that you've included in your brochure or whatever it might be. Better still, community leaders, if you engage them in developing of your translation, in co-designing your brochures, your website, whatever it is that you might be working with, there's even more people that are going to be involved and know about what you do and what is, you know, what the message is that you're going to be talking to them about. If you go to an ethno-specific community organization, there'll be yet more people that will learn about what you do and what you are telling people about. And of course, at the end of the day, the purple color, which should wake everybody up even though it's afternoon, it's the community. So that is who everything's intended for. Yes, it is for you to feel good about your job. Yes, it is for you to innovate and you know, create partnerships. But at the end of the day, it is the person that will go to their local doctor. It is the person that will have a mammogram. It is the person that will want to feel safe in the community that needs your information. So the impact of the translation, the social impact of your translation, is directed at the community, and that's the base of everything that we do. So look, I've put there a couple of things that might resonate with you, and one is that the translation, for it to be impactful, it needs to be accurate. Okay, it needs to be correct, it needs to be respectful, it needs to be clear, and you need to be able to measure it, and that's probably one of the most difficult things to do. And we'll touch on it with Anne and Nicholas shortly. But whatever message you are developing, it's not a one-way conversation, or it shouldn't be a one-way conversation. It needs to be a dialogue, and one that builds relationship and one that builds trust, especially if the topic of what you're promoting or what you're telling the community about is difficult or challenging, such as the one that we're going to be talking about in a moment. But essentially, if you are going to do translation, you know, let's make sure that the outcomes for the community are improved. Let's not do this translation just to tick off boxes for the sake of it, or so that it looks good on your website. You know, the co-design principles that we'll be talking about shortly with Pam and Nicholas are to do precisely with that. It's about building trust and, yes, fulfilling your plans and contributing to your job satisfaction, but mostly it is to benefit real people at the end of your brochure, at the end of your TV screen, at the end of your you know, computer or a phone. You know, a lot of people do have smartphones. So that's what I wanted to say about social impact of translation before we move on to the next slide, where I've just put a little example of what it might mean, you know, as far as, you know, communities. So I'll ask Andrea to, yep, that's it. And we are going to be talking today about the Rohingya community, which is quite small and compared to some others. And as an example there on the screen, I put around 800 people that live in southeast of Melbourne. And, you know, in a way, they're no different than any other community in Australia. It's just that they're small in numbers. And Rohingya is not a written language. So with PEN, we were talking about that before. And sometimes it might be written in Arabic script, but a lot of the time it's actually written, it's transliterated in English characters. And we do know that for this particular community, as many, many others as well, including English-speaking communities, the levels of literacy are quite low. But the very interesting thing about Rohingya people is that most of them are multilingual. So Pan will tell you that she speaks probably 5 or 6 languages, which is amazing. And sometimes English isn't one of them, but you know, there are lots of languages that that people do speak. But how do you reach them? Okay, if you do just a translation and put it on your website, the potential reach is from 0 to 10 people maybe, yeah? Because people won't even know that your organization exists or the message that you have is particularly pertinent to them. But if you design it, and you know, you can clearly see that these numbers are made up, right? Because it's really difficult to measure the impact of translation on a community, and to be sure that the effort you're putting in is actually going to be useful to the community. But at least the 10 people that worked on your translation will be impacted in a positive way. And if it's interpreters and community leaders, they will spread the word, which is the whole purpose of this method, I guess, when it comes to translation. So I'm going to hand over to Nicholas now, because I've talked enough. And he will tell you about how it's actually done with the principles of user experience. Over to you, Nicholas.
Thanks so much, Eva. Yes, guys, I'm going to be talking about how it's done. So you've heard me do this a couple of times if you've been through the webinar, but for those that haven't, it is all about the user's experience. At the end of the day, what we do as LSPs and what you guys do as you know, clients of us is you try and penetrate the market to these communities that need it the most, and we try and make their lives easier, and that's all about user experience. Now I've got a few dot points here that I've listed, and I'm just going to run through them briefly. But there's some of the things you've heard from me before, time and time again, because they are so important. So for those of you that have had conversations with me in the past, please bear with me. But for those of you that haven't, hopefully you learned something a little new here. The first point we've got here is that no one size fits all solutions. Now that's very important to understand, because I hate to see my clients and the people we work with take translation as a transactional process, because it's not. It's not a transactional process where we can put a blanket over the top of everything and say, yep, that covers off that community. It's never like that. And the reason being, there's so many communities out there with different experiences, different literacy levels, different ways of interacting with information, different preferences, and we'll never ever get to a one size fits all solution. Leading on from that, I want to speak about getting to know your audience and asking questions. And this kind of carries on to the next point too, about doing some research and collecting data. Now, this is super important when doing your translations, because there's no point translating something without looking into your audience and getting to know them, getting to know their preferences, what media is going to impact them the most, what kind of languages do we need to do for that certain community. And that's all about, you know, getting to know your audience. Polaron does a very specific things with its communities, which is called community consultation. And that's where we reach out to the community and we go through a process of surveying and asking questions. And it helps the clients to understand their audience a little bit better and get to know which language pairs they might need to include within their dissemination strategy. The next point here is to innovate and co-design. Now, innovate, everyone knows they need to be innovative, but it's also about using co-design to your advantage to innovate. Now, most people out there doing translations, or the standard run-of-the-mill ones, surely none of my clients, I know that for a fact, are out there doing the transactional thing and simply just contacting that 90 certified translator and not worrying about it the next day. But at Polaron, we really put an emphasis on co-designing. And what that is basically like we've done in this project that we'll be speaking about soon is we've gotten in touch with Pan, a community leader out there who's part of an organization. She's got a large reach and she's able to help us co-design these translations. She's helped us to pick the right terminology and then to disseminate it after the matter is completed. Now that obviously carries on into the next point, which I know a lot of you hate to hear, but it is about investing that time and money. Now, I know it's end of financial year, so a lot of you have probably still got some budget left in that pocket. And if you do, I highly suggest you come and talk to me about how we can improve your dissemination strategy and your communications collateral just before the tipping point. But it is about investing time and money. We can all, do something nice and quick, tick a box, spend as little money as we want on that and save so much time, but it's not going to be a meaningful effort. You will have wasted what little time and money you spent on that with little to no result. And it kind of links on to what Eva was talking about with her pyramid. If we just spend the tip of the pyramid doing as little as we can, we're not going to reach as many of our community that we want to. Whereas if we spend that extra time and money investing in a proper translations project like the community approved translations behind me, we're actually going to reach that community with more penetration and with a greater reach. Experiment. This is a really good point, and Eva's one big advocate for this. She's even put become a rebel in there. It's about jumping outside the status quo and getting outside of that little box that so many of my previous clients and future clients I'm sure are trapped in. It's about challenging what people say you need to do and going, you know what, let me contact Pan, let me speak to my communities out there and see what's actually going to be meaningful to them. I might touch on this a little bit later, but during this project, Pan's actually reached out to us after we've done the work of translating, and she's offered to do a video for us for women's health in the Southeast. That's just a bit of a preview, but this is the client we were working for. She's offered to come out and do something that's actually going to be a bit different, be a bit out of the status quo for what the client wanted, but it's going to make all the more difference. And I think that's so important to be a bit of a rebel and to challenge what your superiors might be saying. Last 2 points: to share, recycle, and save. That is a given. There are so many organizations that come to me and say, look, we don't know where to start, Nick. We don't know what to do. A couple of weeks back, we did a case study with Family Planning Victoria, and this was a great example of where we were able to recycle and save some money. They had some resources stored away, actually, that we were able just to improve on. You may very well have translations in your collateral somewhere stored in the cabinets. And that's good enough for us to go, yep, you know what, we've got a basis to work with. We can go and community approve this, or we can get some community approval going for this. And it doesn't necessarily all need to come through Polaron. We're not greedy like that. We just want to make sure that we're doing the right thing for our communities out there. Last point here before I lead onto a conversation with Pan is talking to your LSP. More often than not, a lot of people like to, even when they've got a language services provider, treat it transactionally, and that's not the case. You'll see here once we go over the case study that it's very important to get the communication down pat, and that can be in a range of factors, whether it's project briefings, calling, email communication, setting meetings. All of these little things help to generate an easier communication stream, and therefore the message is so much clearer to the communities we're translating for. So with that, I might get Pan to unmute her mic here and I'll slowly introduce her in, but she is one of the standouts for the project I'll be talking about in the next few slides. Her experience and knowledge is invaluable in things like this. And we were able to use her for the Rohingya language. And I'll now leave that up to you, Pan, just to tell me, firstly, what have translations been like for you in your experience? How has it helped you with your community, as you're very much in touch with the Rohingya community?
For me, I've been translating since childhood because, my parents, they are weak in English, but they sent me to English, good school. So even the time we also, translate for our parents. And as you know, Eva was talking before, Rohingya people, they can speak multi-languages. So I know also Urdu as well, also a bit of, Arabic as well. So it also helped me to, explore more cultural knowledge as well. So when I came to Australia, because of this languages that I know, I was able to make friends and, get along well with their culture, which is very crucial. And also being a Rohingya community leader, my Rohingya people, they are very reserved as they came from very, reserved culture. So, I have, this translation is very important and they are new in Australia. So they are kind of understanding Australian culture as well. So translation is not only like, you translate one language to one language, like English to Rohingya. It's actually, no, you are translating a complete new culture to another culture.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's like building a big humanitarian and community. You are uniting them, making a peace and harmony. So you need to use the right dialects, the right information that will create effective translation. That will be also good for the audience, also good for the organization as well.
Yeah, I think you've put it there perfectly. It's not about translating one language into another, translating one word into the next word. It's about translating one culture into another culture. And you couldn't have said it better, because for this project that we will be talking about, that's what it was. It was a domestic violence resource that we're putting out there, obviously during COVID-19. Pressure does mount for some families, and people are stuck at home. So it can be a very challenging time. And you were just saying there, for the Rohingya people, a very conservative group of people, something like this topic can be very challenging to talk about. And that's where just translating from one thing to the next is not going to be sufficient. And where we need to actually go out there, translate this culture's words into the next culture's words, so that it's familiar. Perfect. I couldn't have said it better myself. So now I might just get you to touch on, Pen, your experience in the community with the Rohingya people and Burmese as well, because that is also one of your languages, and what it's like being able to give back to the community here in Australia from your perspective and your point of view.
Burmese and Rohingya, even though they are from the same country, I would say Burmese is more, open-minded, whereas our Rohingya, they are kind of reserved. And, even though like I understand both language, even though I'm familiar with both culture, but, it's also, we have to use, when we are translating, for Rohingya, we have to be more polite, whereas Burmese is, you can be, easily informal or formal. So if I say in a word like, Burmese can be, like USA English, whereas Rohingya can be, UK English. So when it comes to Rohingya, you have to be more polite, because it's all the scripture is come from Arabs. Mm-hmm. It's more, Arabic script, and also the culture is a bit similar to Arab as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, that's also echoing what we're talking about in terms of a community approval process. It makes sense that for some languages, we are able to be a bit more informal, and for others, we're able to, or we need to be a little bit more formal. And that's where having someone like yourself, Pan, a community leader that understands the community here in Australia, but also the community that come from back home to Australia, what their perspectives are on language. Should we be more informal? Should we be more formal in this instance? When there's a sentence there that might sound a little informal, you were mentioning to me before when we were in conversation that you were able to pick up on that and say, wait a second, in the Rohingya community down here, we're not going to be using this kind of informality, and we need to formalize this. And you offer that suggestion to the translator, and they're able to take it on. But I might leave that for the next couple of slides, because we will touch on that case study in a second. But I did want to show everyone that's watching now, if we can move on to the next slide, the power of having a community leader co-design with you. Now, that's something that Eva and I have banged on for the last, 20 minutes and the last 10 webinars, but basically this is the physical power and physical numbers you can just see from having someone like Pan, who is out there in the community, understands her community, has a very large following, is able to basically speak for that community. You'll see here that she's just shared our webinar the other day, and we look at just the sheer number of people she's reached in 2 days. I think it was 2 days. She's gotten to all these community, all of the community and Rohingya people and Burmese and whoever might be there. But that's the power of co-designing with an ethno-specific organization or a community leader. You're going to get that reach that you wouldn't otherwise get if you were to just do a standard translation or a transactional process.
I think, sorry, I'll butt in there for a minute, because what we were talking with Pan about as well is some of the challenging aspects of that kind of fame or speaking for the community, because Pan was telling us that her grandparents are very well respected and very well known. But she herself had, still, I think, is working on building, I guess, that trust with the community and a standing within the community. And we talked about a couple of controversial things before we came online. So perhaps maybe you could tell us a bit more about that.
Well, as I came from a reserve culture, even though I grew up in Yangon, I came in Australia, I became, been here, a citizen in nearly 11 years. So the challenges, there's not that much challenge. It's about, learning, exploring. For me, even though I grew up in Burma, my community and my people teach me how to be polite, how to be elegant. But when I came to Australia, I lost my father at that time, and I just started walking. I built my own career and everything. And Australia culture taught me how to be independent and, how to value multicultural. Because in Australia, I have got friends from all countries, Indian, Lebanese, Polish, and also, all sort of this culture is very, beautiful. And sometimes the amazing thing that I will tell you is, as I love food, and I think, some of the food you can find in all the culture, like, for example, what I was having, like biryani. Even there's also Lebanese style of biryani as well, even, in Rohingya as well. So sometimes, we become friends, our food, all the culture at the end is similar.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, yep. I think with that image in mind, I think we might move on swiftly to the next slide, if we can, please, Andrea, and just talk a little bit more about this project. So we've touched on it earlier in the presentation, but basically this was something that was new for us, in the sense that we were doing it in the Rohingya language, and we'd never really touched on a topic like this before in the Rohingya language. So having Pan on board as a community leader was very important. So I just might want to let you speak a little bit on this part and this campaign specifically, and how you think it was actually important to the community with the reservations of the Rohingya people. So I might get you to touch on that if you can, please.
Okay, well, the translation is for the, domestic violence, to, make aware Rohingya female about the domestic violence. So when I was doing translating, it was kind of a bit informal, the word they use. It's mainly because I think the translator, I think he's from another part of the, Rohingya community. Because the Rohingya community that I came from, my both parents, they came from Maundo. So over there, we use more formal language. Like, for example, like you in English, Maundo Rohingya, they use like one. So that's more polite. Whereas Rohingya from Buttidown, they use tu. So that kind of, I think, informal dialogues are not suitable to make aware for the domestic violence. Especially when it comes to female, we have to be use more formal, polite, and gentle word that they will feel comfortable. And as I was mentioning before, our Rohingya culture is very reserved. So I think the formal language can at least, break down the ice, that they will be a bit familiar and they are able to share if they are having any issues like domestic violence. Um, as I was mentioning before, translating is not like just translating one word to one word. It's also you are translating a cultural feelings and emotions as well. So it has to reach to people effectively.
Yeah.
Of course, Pan. It's a topic that can be controversial, I guess, in any community. But I think what I wanted to say here is that if you are wanting to reach smaller communities, it's more of a challenge because often service providers do not translate for them. So they'll go for top 5, top 10, and the smaller, rarer and emerging communities are left behind with information that we get in the mainstream, right? So therefore, those conversations could sometimes be even more challenging because they've never been exposed to certain concepts. So that sensitivity and that co-design and working with the translator to get it right is ever so important, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is very important. Actually, I think our Rohingya is quite large. I think some services they are not reaching out maybe because they are not familiar with the Rohingya community minority. As I was mentioning before, in Sydney there are nearly I would say it would be nearly more than 8,000 or 10,000 people live in Sydney, Lakamba. In Melbourne, the whole suburb like Spring Farm, most of the people Rohingya people live over there. But even though I've been in here for 11 years, even if I come across any Australian or any European, anyone, no one can guess where original I came from. When I told them I'm a Rohingya, they were like, oh,
what's that?
Yes, and they started to know more, explore more, and sometimes some people are even surprised that I can speak, 4 languages. I can speak Burmese, I can speak Urdu, I can speak Rohingya, and I can also speak a little bit of Arab as well. So they are like, how you pick up? I say, well, I learned because when we were young, this is what our parents, sent us, if you are going to religious school, they teach us Arabic and also Urdu. And in Burmese school, they teach us Burmese. So it's like, and I think, most of the community, they need to look out these minority people as well, because as I was mentioning before, in Melbourne, I think it was 2 years back or 1 year back, there was a Rohingya man. He couldn't get any support because he was new to this country and he has no family here and he doesn't know anything about this country culture. And at the end, he just suicide himself by, putting petrol on him and burn himself. And he did that one in front of the, CBA bank, because the bank people, they cannot understand him. What is he trying to say? And I think maybe there was a lack of, maybe he needs something help, but they cannot understand. At the end, he just did like that. And at the end, he also harmed other people as well, which is like, if he could have get this kind of, support or this kind of, services from, other community, or if, so at least we could have, stopped him or we could have saved him.
Yeah. I think that's a really powerful story. It's a very grim picture, but it is true. And I think it really does correlate to what Pan is saying, is if we don't give the minority communities and the CALD communities of Australia this kind of support and this kind of attention to detail with actually realizing their culture and giving them the correct information instead of misinforming them, we will end up with more cases like that. Maybe not as severe, but you will get minor cases like this throughout all of the CALD communities that we don't disseminate information to correctly. So I think Pan's role as a community leader is justified completely if not by one story, but the thousands of micro stories like that will be occurring through Australia today. That on its own is a good segue into this next part, which I want to talk about a case study that we've done with, and this will answer that question in the chat, by the way. So which domestic violence organisation was the communication piece for? This was for the Women's Help in the Southeast. So they're an organisation supporting women out there in the southeastern suburbs of Victoria. And this was on a domestic violence campaign during COVID-19. So first and foremost, just a very big props to these guys for their great work and their good practice. And I often like to pick on and grab clients that I know are doing the right thing, and Women's Health in the Southeast are definitely one of those clients. Now, this project was a very interesting one because we were trying to reach out to communities that we know were out in the Southeast, but we know were very affected by domestic violence or were very prone to domestic violence. So we had to work with WHISE, and I'll call them WHISE for now instead of Women's Health in the Southeast because it is a bit of a mouthful and we do have a limited amount of time. But WHISE came to us with a really intense project brief that was able to highlight all the messages they needed translated. And this was very English, obviously. They've got their hashtags there, "You are not alone," and all of these different messages that they wanted to convey. And now, how would you usually go about doing this? If you were to translate it, you would go very, very little. You would not go anywhere with it because things like "you are not alone" may not translate directly from one language to another. And that's why it's very, very important to get certain messages like that down pat with the community and understood in such a way that it's going to disseminate easily and actually make sense. So that's where a really important part came from WHISE, is their project brief was clear. With that, we were able to go to the community leader, Pan, and the others, because there were other languages other than Rohingya, and actually co-design this translation with the translators. So with the engagement from translators, checkers, and community leaders, we were able to create this kind of translation that was going to be adapted into the "You Are Not Alone" campaign. I might move swiftly onto the next slide here and just talk about some key outcomes from this WHISE project with Pan. Now, linguistically accurate and culturally appropriate messaging. Now, you've heard me ram on about making sure your linguistic assets are accurate in previous webinars, and if you hadn't, go back and visit those. They're on our YouTube channel. But basically, culturally appropriate messaging is just as important. If we are going to translate something with a NADI certified translator, and we've gone through the effort of employing that, certified professional, we may as well go that extra step and get it culturally appropriate. Because like Pan said with this instance with the man who felt isolated and felt misinformed with no one to support him, that is how some of our communities in Australia feel when we don't give them culturally appropriate messaging. If you give someone a pamphlet that has been totally, maybe even Google translated, and give them to it as a token of assistance, it's going to do more harm than good. We're actually going to isolate them further because they're going to feel, well, look, these guys don't care about me. This organization doesn't really care about my needs. They haven't gone through the effort to give me a resource that's actually practical, and it's going to isolate them further. Now, and that's where the community approval process comes into this. And Pan, you might be able to touch on it briefly, but this community approval process, it's a lot different to translating word to word. It's more of a culture experience. You're able to, like you said before, cater to those more reserved Rohingyans and ensure that we're not putting some informal, jibber jabber on the piece of paper, but we're actually giving them what they need to reach out to Women's Health in the Southeast, to actually pick up that resource and go, wait a second, this actually makes sense to me. I'm now feeling a little bit more welcome to reach out. Would I be right in saying that with this translation?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I'll jump onto the next point here, and that's adapting the message to the community. So there's an 80-20 rule that Eva's developed a few years ago, but it's very true to what we do here at Polaron. And it's about making sure that 80% of your information is specific to the resource. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but 20% is adapted to the actual community themselves. Is that?
Yeah, that's right. So it's done by negotiation. So for example, if a community wants us to put a packet of cigarettes and have it crossed out in red on a brochure, we can't do that. So we have to explain to them why you can't do that in Australia. But around 20% of your resources can be adapted to your community. And what we mean by that is the images, you know, to make them culturally appropriate, because you want people to pick up the brochures that they can relate to. It might be the type of language we use. It might even be, you know, colors in some instances. But certainly the formats, so for some communities that might be a video, whereas for other communities it's a brochure. It just really depends. So you have to reach out to community leaders like Pan and ask them about it, right? So respectfully negotiate your content, and about 80% of your content cannot change because you have particular messages that you need to send out there, and they kind of have to be the same for everyone. So if it's about, I don't know, quitting smoking or domestic violence or whatever it might be, there are basic things that you still need to say to the community in line with who you are as an organization or the message that you're wanting to disseminate or promote. But there are ways of, explaining or I guess adapting the message so that it works for the community. And the ultimate aim, and this is what we're going to get Ben to speak about, is for the community to feel engaged, respected, and listened to. So it is a two-way street. So you don't just dump information onto people and expect them to somehow absorb it by miracle, but it's a conversation. So I think involving, several people from the community, when we're developing these resources is the right way to go. Sometimes the feedback does have to be negotiated because our translators are like, what would a community leader know? I'm the translator, I'm not native certified. So sometimes we have to kind of manage that and respect all the parties to this translation process respectfully. But a lot of the time when Pan speaks to our translator, if we put them in touch with each other, they will find a solution. And sometimes it's one word, or it's an expression that people might have questions about. So Pan, maybe you can tell us about how you negotiate that feedback, because clearly, language is something that we're attached to, and you might have an opinion and I might have an opinion. So how do you negotiate that feedback respectfully? What have you had to do?
I just only, like, for example, like you were saying before, I just only review the translation, but the person, he already translated. So he has already spent an effort. So I can see there is some word that he can make it better. So I just, I recommend you can do this way better, because I explain my opinion, because this message is going to reach out to, different age group of females. So with this word, they might not gonna feel comfortable, as our culture is very reserved. But if you use this word, it will be more formal, polite, and it will be comfortable for the ladies. If they need help, they can reach us to the campaign easily. And also with the, this, because the word that the campaign has written, "You are not alone," is the main message. So that main message should be formal, and it should reach out to female, and female can share more comfortable to share their problem if they have it.
And I think most translators are very appreciative of that feedback from community leaders such as yourself, because it is true that a lot of translators don't really get out. That's sad but true, because they work at their computers and they do a lot of research about words and how translation works, and they're well educated. But often they're not on the ground like you are, where you see the real issues and what might work for the community. So it's a process of collaboration and partnership, which, you know, all the parties need to be respectful of. And sometimes if there's a disagreement about a particular word or expression, then we work to resolve it. But your input has also been into how to disseminate that information. So at some point you came to Nicholas and said, you know what, I think it would be a really good idea to develop a video, because can you tell us why that is? Why would a video work better than translated materials for the Rohingya community?
The reason is because I feel like, you know, with a video, at least people can see, they can reach out. Because whereas, you know, written word, like a reading, it's just you are reading. Maybe I feel that, you know, suppose if some female, they are having issues, maybe they just reading it, maybe they're not gonna be that much, you know, as I was saying, our culture is very reserved, and they might not gonna be, you know, that much easily come and share. Maybe with a video, if they have it, it will reach out to them, and at least they will come and, you know, share their problems. If people, they have it, they are, you know, domestic issues.
And that's a really nice way to describe it, where you provide a resource that's shareable and people might feel more engaged and be able to relate to you, speaking about those things rather than having it written. Do you know, we've so badly run out of time that we only have a couple of minutes for questions, I think. So I'm going to hand over to Andrea, but I think what people are mostly interested in, Pan, is your words. So hand over to Andrea and let's see what questions we have, because we've got quite a few and not a lot of time.
Yes, so the first question will be, how do you choose the right community leader to work with to co-design translations?
So I might grab that one, and that is a challenge, because we, you know, it's fair to say that sometimes community leaders might have different viewpoints, different agendas, different priorities. So you have to be a little bit careful and work with the community leaders to get to know them. So you know, you don't just grab anyone. We vet our community leaders very carefully and very respectfully at the same time. And sometimes it means several people to give us that perspective. And, you know, for smaller communities like Rohingya, and Pan is going to be able to tell us more about that, there are different fractions, there is different opinions. So sometimes it's about negotiating and finding the person that that's fair. I think, you know, we're looking for the word fair, I think, in this context. What would you say about that, Pan?
Yeah, you're right. We can say fair.
And that's sometimes a challenge. So you have to, in answer to the question, you have to talk to people and see what they say and who they are, and you know, basically interview them and manage that feedback with translators and community leaders in a respectful way.
Thank you. We have a concern from one of our attendees. So she said the Italian community hate brochures, and the majority of migrants only did school to year 5. They hate reading, their eyesight is poor, they don't have anything in regards to website addresses, they prefer videos or simple ads. So she's telling us that in all this year, agencies are not responding to that situation, that issue. So what do you think about that, guys?
I think I might jump in here and just touch on this a little bit. This is a really good question, I think, because not a lot of agencies understand it enough. And Pan, as I mentioned before, actually tried to reach out and is offering to help the Women's Health in the Southeast to actually create a voiceover for this translation that we're doing, because more often than not, it does come down to time and money. It is about investing that time and money. As I've mentioned in one of my points before, if we don't invest the time and money, we're not going to disseminate information in the way it needs to be disseminated. And that's the same for the Italian community. It's the same for many, many other communities out there. And there are a select few organizations that are doing this right. There are people out there that do care. So I wouldn't put a blanket over all agencies not doing the right thing, but there definitely are people that need to learn from these agencies that are developing video resources with subtitling and voiceover, being able to show something in an animation as well. is so much more simple for a community than, you know, slabs of website text or something of the like.
We will turn clients away from time to time, and Nicholas will tell you this, that if someone comes to us with a resource that we know that the community is not going to be able to read, for example, we tell them not to waste their time and money. And not everybody wants to hear that, but I think sometimes it needs to be said.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Can you quickly walk through what you think is the right and culturally sensitive process of translating material in general?
Nah, honestly, as much as I joke about it, it is true, and we've rapped on about it, so I won't touch on it too much. And I think it's Ash who's asked that question. Please do feel free to reach out to me for a bit more of an in-depth chat about it. But it is about consulting the community, and I think it always has been. You know, we reached out to Pan for this exercise, and we do it occasion on occasion. We go to the community and we reach out to them, and we get them to review the resources, both in English and after translation. I couldn't speak for a more consistent and culturally appropriate, or as you've said, culturally sensitive way of doing things, apart from getting it approved by the community. It just makes sense, and the points were throughout the webinar as to why.
Thanks. There's a question for Pan. Do you work alongside with other community leaders when checking a translation?
For this project, I work by my own, but if there's a project came up, if I knew that I can bring along another community leaders, then why not? Because as you know, like this question has came up, sometimes some people, they don't know where to find these messages, they don't know the website. So if I know that there's another community leader who is interested, that I can bring along, so the message will reach out to more people, and that will be better for the community as well.
Thank you, guys. That's about it for today. Thanks.
All right. So can I wrap up by firstly thanking our wonderful, wonderful community leader, Pan. I wanted to thank you sincerely for spending your afternoon with us, but also working on the resources, because they will and they do make a difference to families who might be struggling, and to people that need this information. And as I said, even though the community is quite small to perhaps others, they are thirsty for information, and they are thirsty for information that's respectful and useful, I think is what I would say. So thank you. We wish you all the best with all your interesting endeavors. I know that you've now got your own company, and you're out there representing not just the community, but you're a true leader, in any way that we can imagine the meaning of that word. I also wanted to thank Nicholas, who has contributed lots of very interesting points, and to Andrea behind the scenes, who tirelessly works on these webinars, and I hope people find them useful. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Any questions, you can reach out, but big bravo to Pan for being part of it today. Thank you. And thanks, Nick. Thank you, Andrea.
Thanks, Pan. Thanks so much, guys. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.